Sometimes, the scariest part of a mystery isn't what we discover. It's what remains unanswered. In 1966, two Brazilian men set out on a strange journey, leaving behind everything they knew, and were found dead under bizarre circumstances. No wounds, no struggle, just two lifeless bodies on a remote hillside, wearing lead masks. No one knows how they died, but what they left behind: notes, coded messages, and whispers of extraterrestrial contact. This isn't fiction. This is Brazil's creepiest real-life unsolved death mystery. Welcome to the lead masks case. Niterói, Brazil. August 17, 1966. The late afternoon heat settled like a blanket over the bustling port city, but in a quiet suburb, one woman sat at her window, eyes searching the road. Maria de Conceição hadn't heard from her cousin Miguel José Viana in 2 days. That wasn't like him. He was responsible, careful, logical even. She glanced at the small clock near the hallway. It was almost 5 p.m. That's when the call came. A local boy had been flying his kite near Morro do Vintum, a grassy hill outside town, when he stumbled across something strange. Two bodies, lying side by side, wearing suits and masks, lead masks. When police arrived at Morro do Vintum, the scene was chilling. Two men, one older, one younger, lay neatly on their backs. No visible signs of violence. No blood. No bruises. No struggle. Each man had a strange lead-eye mask, the kind used to protect from radiation or welding sparks. In their pockets, a water bottle, 2 towels, a cryptic note, 1630B at the agreed place, 1830 ingest capsules, after effect protect metals wait for mask signal. No one could make sense of it. The bodies were identified quickly. Manuel Pereira de Cruz, 32, and Miguel José Viana, 34. Both were electronics technicians from the nearby city of Campos dos Goitacazes. Known for being intelligent and reclusive, they were fascinated with radio frequencies, electrical experiments, and, it turns out, the paranormal. People who knew them said they'd been obsessed lately, reading books about spirit communication, aliens, and beings of light. They believed they could build a device to contact higher realms. The deeper police dug, the stranger it got. They weren't just building radios. They were planning something else. 4 days earlier, the two men told family they were traveling to Sao Paulo to buy work equipment. But they never arrived there. Instead, they were seen buying waterproof coats, bottled water, notebook. They also withdrew a large amount of cash, which vanished, never found with the bodies. A bus ticket confirmed they had headed toward Niterói, not Sao Paulo. Then they vanished, until their bodies appeared on the hill. The lead masks puzzled investigators. They weren't attached to helmets or goggles, just crudely made eye shields, shaped to block vision entirely. Why would two grown men lie down in the grass, put on lead masks and die? Autopsies revealed no signs of trauma, no internal bleeding, no poisoning that could be traced. Toxicology reports were delayed for weeks due to a backlog, and by then, decomposition had erased potential clues. But the note, ingest capsules, suggested something. Did they take drugs voluntarily? Was it a ritual? Or was someone else involved? A notebook found in Miguel's home contained pages upon pages of strange experiments. Symbols, instructions. One entry stood out. Prepare room for spiritual cleansing. Radiate light. Align frequency. Await signal. Locals began whispering that Miguel and Manuel had joined a secret society, possibly linked to UFO beliefs. Others said they had been tricked, used by someone promising contact with beings of light. A bartender remembered them the night before their deaths, nervous, checking their watches, asking for the time repeatedly. One of them said, "We have to be ready for the signal." But what signal? Weeks passed. Police closed the case as death by unknown causes. But a journalist named Carlos de Souza refused to let it go. He retraced their steps, interviewed neighbors, traveled to Campos. That's when he found an old woman named Dona Helena, who ran a spiritual shop. She told him they'd visited her twice. They were looking for something to cleanse their auras. They spoke of a mission. They believed they were chosen to make contact with other worlds. They were scared, she said, but excited. Carlos asked what she thought happened. Her response: they went to meet someone. But it wasn't who they thought it was. Carlos soon uncovered a third name, someone who may have been with them during their final hours. Ricardo. No full name, no address, just a name scribbled in the corner of a torn journal page. Some said he was a spiritual guide. Others whispered he was a con artist, exploiting believers. But no one had seen him since the day the men died. Not one person. Some believed he never existed. Others believed he was the one who gave them the capsules and watched them die. Back on Morro do Vintum years later, children playing near the same spot where the bodies were found made a discovery. Buried under a layer of brush and soil was a third lead mask. Smaller, newer, and next to it, a burned fragment of paper with a single word barely legible. Return. Had someone come back? Was there a third man? Or worse, was someone still watching? As Carlos held the mask in his hands, a cold wind blew through the valley. This mystery was far from over. A month after Carlos de Souza found the third lead mask on Morro do Vintum, he received an unmarked envelope at his small newsroom in Rio. Inside were 3 items. A photograph of Miguel and Manuel seated at a wooden table, eyes closed, hands hovering over a metallic object. A torn piece of a notebook, matching Miguel's handwriting. A single cassette tape labeled Test 2.8. Mask signal. Carlos froze. The photograph was dated 2 days before the bodies were discovered. And in the background of the photo stood a shadowy figure with his back turned. The third man. Carlos played the tape in his studio. Static hissed for several seconds before a voice emerged. Measured. This is test 2.8. Miguel and Manuel will ingest the capsule at 1830. Metal protection engaged. Awaiting contact. We are not alone. We are frequencies. They will come. Tape crackled. Then a sound like a low, pulsing hum filled the room. Carlos jolted and yanked the tape out. Was this the signal they spoke of? Who was the voice? He played the tape again. There was no mistake. The voice didn't belong to Miguel or Manuel. It belonged to someone else. Someone still out there. Carlos traveled back to Campos dos Goitacazes to speak with Miguel's sister, Lucia. She was reluctant to talk. Too many reporters had hounded her. But when Carlos showed her the photo and tape, her expression changed. She whispered, "That's him." "Him who?" Carlos asked. "The man who came to the house. The night Miguel left. He wore all white. Said he was taking my brother on a spiritual journey. Told us to trust the light." Carlos asked if she knew his name. She nodded slowly. "Ricardo." Carlos dug deeper into Ricardo's past. Rumors in town suggested he had once worked as a military engineer, but disappeared after becoming involved in fringe spiritual groups. One retired professor, Dr. Geraldo Lima, remembered him from a symposium in the 1950s. Ricardo was brilliant, the professor said. But then he became obsessed. He believed radio frequencies could open portals, not just metaphorically, literally. He said if tuned properly they could summon them. Beings of light, Geraldo replied. Ricardo thought he could meet them and take others with him. Carlos returned to the station to review the tape once more. He noticed something strange. The waveform had patterns, repeating pulses, almost like a code. He brought the recording to Isabela Monteiro, a former codebreaker for Brazil's Navy. Took her a week. What she uncovered changed everything. "The pattern spells out a phrase," she said. "The masks are not for this world." Carlos stared in silence. Were the masks meant to shield from something else? Not radiation, not light, but something beyond our understanding. Before Carlos could publish his findings, news broke. A man had been found dead in São Gonçalo, not far from where Miguel and Manuel had lived. Same posture, same suit, same lead mask. And next to him, a black notebook with a silver spiral. The last page was burned, except for a few words. They lied. We weren't ready. The door opened, but not to them. It was the other ones, the ones who hide. Police ruled it a suicide. Carlos knew better. Someone was trying to send a message. But what were they trying to warn about? Carlos began to follow whispers of a secret group operating in the Serra dos Orgulhos mountains. He trekked to a rural village where locals warned him not to ask questions. But one woman, Marina, the daughter of a former member, broke the silence. They called themselves these scientific spiritualists of light, she said. Her father had once attended meetings. He came back different, terrified, paranoid. He believed they were trying to reach the stars, but instead had opened something they couldn't control. They stopped calling them beings of light, she said. They started calling them watchers. Carlos published an exposé. He revealed tape, the photograph, the third body, the decoded message. His article went viral in Brazil. Suddenly, everyone wanted answers. But with attention came danger. Carlos received a warning, an anonymous message. Stop digging. The masks were just the beginning. 2 nights later, someone broke into his home. Only one thing was missing, the cassette tape. Carlos knew the stakes had changed. This was no longer just about Miguel and Manuel. It was bigger, more organized. The group still existed, still watching. He contacted a former police detective, Enrique Silva, who had investigated the case in 1966 before it was shut down. Enrique was old, dying of cancer, but he agreed to talk. Back then, he rasped, we were told to stop. Higher-ups said it was a military matter. One day, the lead masks were gone from the evidence room. Just vanished. He looked Carlos in the eye. You're not chasing a cold case, he said. You're poking something that's still very much alive. The day before Enrique passed away, he handed Carlos a letter. It was a written confession from Ricardo. It read, I didn't kill them, guided them. We believed the masks would protect us from the blinding effect of contact. But I was wrong. The light never came. The silence did. And then, the voices. I left before they died. I couldn't watch what came through. Carlos read the letter again and again. This wasn't a cult. This wasn't suicide. This was an experiment. Gone wrong. Weeks later, Carlos returned to Morro do Vintum, alone. He brought a small handheld radio tuned to the same frequency Miguel had once used. As the sun set, he sat on the same hill, the same position. He waited. The air turned still. At 1830, just like the note had said, a faint hum came through the static. He turned the dial. A voice crackled, but not his, and not human. We see you now. The signal ended. Behind him, the trees rustled. Carlos turned. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, wearing a suit and a lead mask. The masked figure stood motionless at the edge of Morro do Vintum. Carlos froze, every instinct screaming at him to run. But curiosity rooted him to the ground. Who are you? He asked. No answer. Then the figure lifted a gloved hand and pointed to the ground. Carlos stepped forward. The figure stepped back into the trees and vanished. Carlos knelt and began to dig where the man had pointed. After a few inches, his hand hit metal. It was an old lockbox. Inside, second cassette tape. A cracked Polaroid of Miguel and Manuel holding hands over a circle drawn in chalk. A journal marked, Ricardo A. Lemos. The truth was finally within reach. Carlos spent days poring over the journal. Ricardo had documented everything. The experiments, the lead mask's creation, the group's belief that radio frequencies could open a spiritual window, the failed contacts, and then the final attempt. Miguel and Manuel had volunteered. They believed they would ascend, leave their bodies behind. But on that final night, Ricardo wrote, "Something answered, but it was not light. It was noise, painful, dark. Ran. I shouldn't have left them. But I knew what I had awakened wasn't divine. It was cold, touching, ancient." Then came the final line. "If anyone finds this, don't try to finish what we started." Using clues from the journal, Carlos tracked down a retired military archivist named João Ferreira, once assigned to a government paranormal surveillance unit in the 60s. João hesitated to speak, but eventually he cracked. He handed Carlos a sealed file, once marked classified. Inside were black and white photos of dozens of lead masks. Carlos's hands trembled. There had been others, more than Miguel and Manuel. Photos showed other bodies, unreported deaths, found in the 1950s and early 60s, always in pairs, always in remote locations, always with masks. The government had been covering it up. Why? Because they didn't understand it either. Carlos prepared a massive exposé. He leaked files to journalists across Brazil, posted recordings, journal entries, military photos. Social media exploded. Major outlets picked it up. The Brazilian Senate demanded answers from former intelligence officers. João Ferreira was subpoenaed. Ricardo's journal was authenticated. And finally, after nearly 60 years, Miguel and Manuel were exonerated. No longer labeled delusional, no longer forgotten. Miguel's sister, Lucia, stood on national television, holding her brother's photo, tears streaming down her cheeks. For years they called them fools, cultists, mentally unstable, she said. But they were pioneers. They died searching for something beyond this world. And they deserve our respect. Public pressure forced the police to reopen the case. In the final report it now read, "Cause of death, unknown. Likely linked to experimental spiritual or scientific activity. No criminal intent determined. Lead masks preserved for national historical record." Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. One night, as Carlos prepared to move on from the story, he received one last package. No return address. Inside was the second cassette tape he'd found in the lockbox. He played it. The voice was Ricardo's. "If this is being heard, then you found it. You know what we tried to do. Accept my failure. But others won't. Others are still trying. The frequency, it's never stopped. And if someone opens that door again." The tape cut off. But in the background, Carlos could hear a faint whisper, repeating, low and guttural. He played it back in slow motion. It said, "We never left." Carlos published his final documentary series, The Lead Masks, Truth in Static. It won multiple awards. But more importantly, it shifted public consciousness. Government agencies around the world began releasing files on unexplained frequency deaths. In Chile, in Russia, in India, the masks were no longer an isolated mystery. They were a global pattern. Maybe a warning. Carlos had exposed the truth, but he paid the price. Paranoia crept in. He changed phones, moved homes, and every so often at exactly 18:30, his radio turned on by itself. Static, then hums, then silence. He told no one, but he kept a suitcase packed, just in case. End of my story. For nearly 6 decades, the Lead Masks case baffled police, scientists, and skeptics alike. But in the end, it wasn't just a story of death. It was a story of silence, of truth buried in plain sight, and of voices lost to time. 2 men searching for meaning. A government desperate to hide what it couldn't explain. And a mystery that still echoes in the static. If you ever hear a hum on your radio, don't answer, because some doors, once opened, never truly close. This was the Lead Masks case, Brazil's creepiest unsolved deaths. Like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life mysteries that still haunt the world we live in.